Hello, everyone. Hope you are well. Wanted to go over some info that I was turned on to by my good buddy Kevin Muir and his most recent appearance on Macro Voices with Eric and Patrick. And he talked about the TGA and what Janet Yellen was, or that Janet Yellen had been in the news talking about how she wants to bring the TGA down to 500 billion before June. So let me kind of just go over this briefly for those of you who aren't following what I'm talking about, because I haven't really discussed the TGA on my videos. Boy, what man, for maybe a long time, maybe, I don't know, maybe 6 months or something like that. So, and I know I've got a lot of new subscribers. Well, this channel is brand new, but new subscribers on the George Gammon channel as well. And I'm going to be going over this on a whiteboard video Thursday. So I'm just doing some homework here. The TGA is the Treasury General Account. You can see right here. And it's basically the checking account of the government, of the Treasury. It's held at the Fed. So these aren't really currency units that are in the real economy chasing goods and services. They're bank reserves held at the Fed. Another way of thinking about this is these aren't deposits in the commercial banking system. These aren't liabilities of the commercial banking system. They're actually liabilities of the Fed. So that there's a big difference there. And you guys have heard me talk about the fact that if the Fed's liabilities could go to a quadrillion, they can print up as many bank reserves, which are liabilities of the Fed, as they want. And it doesn't necessarily mean that creates more commercial deposits or deposits in the commercial banking system, which is what we should really be focused on, in my opinion, if you're trying to figure out inflation, deflation, which is one of the main reasons why this matters. So this is the TGA. I mean, my goodness, look at it prior to Obama or prior to the GFC, 5 billion. Then the GFC, now we're letting it float up to 46, 76. Here, I mean, if you think about a chart back then, that would have looked like a parabolic move. It went up to 178 billion. And that's a rounding error now. And then when Trump came in, for whatever reason, Mnuchin let it go up to see 400 here. So it's kind of hovering around 400. And then we had the cerveza sickness, and it goes straight up. They're issuing a lot of bonds, and up to 1.8 trillion at one time. So just a staggering number when you think about prior to the GFC, it was just always around 4 or 5 billion. Now up over 1.5 trillion. So why is this a big deal? Okay, that brings me to kind of the recent news. It didn't just break today, but within the last week or so, news that I think is really important. And Kevin, I want to give him all the credit. He pointed this out on the most recent episode of Macro Voices. Oh, no, sorry, not it. Before we get there, you can see what's going on here. And honestly, I listen, Janet Yellen's a smart gal, obviously, but I don't think she really understands, or she might not just, maybe she doesn't understand, but I don't think she understands the plumbing of the financial system, probably because she's never really just gone into it. I mean, obviously, if someone sat there with a whiteboard and like Jeff Snyder or something. Obviously, she has the mental capabilities to understand it quickly, but I don't know if she's really paid much attention to it because it just doesn't come onto her radar. So this is the way I think the that she's looking at it. Like, okay, well, we've got 1.7 trillion at the time of this when this article was written. You can see my pointer. They've got 1.7 trillion in there. Janet Yellen's like, okay, well, this is probably too much. So why don't we just not issue as many treasuries, which is what this article is referring to. You can see Treasury slashes borrowing estimates for first 3 months of 2021. So you'd read that headline as the average Joe or Jane and be like, oh, wow, that is great news. That means the government is most likely going to spend less, so we're not going to have these huge deficits. Not what that means. That just means there's so much money that they've accumulated in this account that they're just going to start spending it now. Therefore, they don't have to raise as much money from the private sector, or the Fed doesn't have to monetize as much of the debt as they otherwise would have. But don't get overexcited. This doesn't really mean that they're not going to be huge deficits this year as well. So she's just looking at this saying, okay, there's 1.7 trillion. I'm just going to lay off the bond auctions here for a while, and we're just going to spend down or draw down this 1.7. And what she said is they want, let's see, looking ahead, second quarter Treasury said it expects to borrow 95 billion in net marketable debt with the cash balance of 500 billion. Right. So she wants to draw down, let's go back to our chart, the TGA from 1.5 trillion down to where it was around this time frame at 400. She's saying 500 billion by June. So right around, I can't get it to a 500 billion mark, but right around this level where the little circle is, and down to this level from this level up here. So you can see that's a big move down in just, call it, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. So why is this important? I guess was probably your next question. Because when you look at, I should have pulled up another chart. I should have had another chart here of the bank reserves on the Fed's balance sheet outside of the TGA, which we could do pretty much by just subtracting their balance sheet. In fact, we could just do that in our heads. That's pretty easy. And these are not exact numbers, but let's just say the Fed's balance sheet is 7 trillion right now. I could probably just go to that really quick. Let me do that. Oh, shoot. Boy, I wish it would just... So... No, this is not what I want. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time here, guys. Bottom line is, let's say it's around 7 trillion. So let's go back to this chart. I know it's around 7, maybe it's 7.4. I'm not sure exactly where it is right now. I think actually Jason Burek said it was going up, so maybe 7.5. And let's say this is at 1.5. So that means that there's $6 trillion roughly in bank reserves on the Fed's balance sheet that are an asset of the commercial banking system. Those are bank reserves that they can use as a backstop or to create additional loans in the real economy. I'm not saying they're doing that. But so now let's think about what quantitative easing is. Quantitative easing is where the Fed prints up bank reserves, funny money, just electronic digits on the computer, to buy treasuries or mortgage-backed securities from the commercial banking system. So it's an asset swap, like Snyder says all the time. So they're swapping bank reserves for treasuries. Those treasuries or mortgage-backed securities go onto the asset side of the Fed's balance sheet. Those newly created bank reserves go to the liability side, which increases their liabilities. And then the balance sheet of the commercial banking system, the assets stay the same. It's just before they had treasuries or mortgage-backed securities, now they have bank reserves. That's quantitative easing. That's when they say they're pumping liquidity, quote unquote, into the system. That's what they're trying to do. And this is trying to create an environment where the banks are going out and lending more. What we've seen is usually this just means they're lending more to hedge funds and financial institutions to go gamble in the stock market. Or they might not even be doing that, but it triggers a psychological it creates a psychological trigger for the market participants where they see the Fed's balance sheet going up. And if they associate it, now I don't know if they're going to make the connection, but if they associate it to quantitative easing, that gets the animal spirits up and then they start to buy, which makes the stock market go higher. So I don't know if they're going to be able to connect those dots, but what I'm saying is when Janet Yellen spends, let's call it the $1 trillion between now and June, assuming we're going to take her at her word, that's basically doing an additional $1 trillion in quantitative easing, because that's all quantitative easing is. It's just giving the banking system more bank reserves. That's the net effect. So she's going to be giving the banking system another $1 trillion in bank reserves between now and June. So think about that. QE3 was $80 billion a month. The Fed is already doing QE as we speak. So they're doing QE infinity at more than what they were doing in QE3 at the last time I checked. So Janet Yellen is going to add another, let's call it over the next 4 months, she's going to reduce this by 250 billion a month. So that's just Janet Yellen. And again, this is outside. I want to be very clear here, but at the risk of being redundant. The Fed is doing QE right now. They're already doing it. And Janet Yellen is going to do an additional 250 billion worth of QE on top of that. And let's remember that QE3, which was supposed to be just the most extreme measures we could fathom at the time, was 80 billion a month. So let's just assume the Fed right now is doing 100 billion a month. Plus this, that means we're going to be doing $350 billion worth of QE per month from now till June or July or whatever her time frame was. I think it was June. But here's the kicker. This QE, meaning Janet Yellen's spending it from the TJ, is different. So how is it different? Because when the Fed does QE, it doesn't directly affect the deposits in the commercial banking system. In other words, it doesn't directly affect the amount of currency units that are in the real economy chasing goods and services. But When Janet Yellen spends, the Treasury spends, how do they spend it? They do it by writing checks and giving those checks to the people in the real economy, or the entities and the individuals. Well, what do they do with the checks? They deposit it where? Into their checking account. So 250 billion worth of QE, the Fed doing it, is simply an asset swap. It doesn't affect the commercial banking system, or excuse me, it doesn't affect the deposits. It affects the assets, but it doesn't affect the liabilities. So, but when Janet Yellen does it, it not only affects the assets, it creates another $100 trillion worth of assets, but it also creates another 100 trillion of liabilities for the commercial banking system, which means there's another $1 trillion of currency units in the real economy. Say it with me: chasing goods and services. So, listen, here's what I would do. If you eat food that doesn't spoil, like canned goods or I don't know, rice or I'm not a cook. I don't cook at all, so you'll have to bear with me. But if you buy those types of food items that take years to spoil or whatever, my suggestion to you: buy them now, because in 4 or 5 months, you're going to be paying a lot more for them. And this isn't even including the supply destruction that we've had with the cerveza sickness lockdown. So, and again, there's probabilities, no certainties, a lot of variables there. I'm kind of half joking, but with an extra $1 trillion of commercial banking deposits, and then also then you got to think through what happens to the stock market. That means another $1 trillion in the back pocket of everyone with a Robinhood account. So this is just informing you of what is happening. If I'm not giving predictions, if I was to give any prediction, it would simply be, if you think the first couple months of 2020 has been complete insanity, you ain't seen nothing yet. Just wait till we see wait for what we see between now and June. That's when the real fireworks, I think, are going to happen. And that's when you're going to see just things that we probably can't even imagine right now.